Hey everybody from Busted Boot Productions, and welcome back to Cooking Up Trouble, the Doomtown deck building series where I talk to someone about the deck that they built. And today I happen to be with, you know him as Tiber Sunsong on the Doomtown Discord, Charles Penn. Hey Charles, how's it going?
Hey, pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Had some coffee, so I'm feeling really hyper. And today we are talking about your Chupacabra Con win, the Texas Ranger badge.
Yeah, it was a very exciting event.
Now, the previous video was actually with the runner-up, Jordan Pridgeon, in his House of Many Faiths deck.
Yeah, he had a really interesting deck that I got very lucky against a few times.
I faced against that very same deck in I think it was the Name a Card event? The Name a Card thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember watching the video and him mentioning that it was the same one. Yeah, I actually did the same thing with this deck. This is the same one from Namekar as well.
Yeah.
As well.
Well, let's jump right into it and start by talking about your home, which is Smith and Robards Trade Show.
Yeah. So it is a very fun home for me. So I've been playing gadgets since a little bit before the game started, or a little bit after the game started. Sorry, not before. So back when there was only one home, the original Morgan.
Yeah.
And I've played Mad Science this entire time, and I think Smith and Robards is my favorite outfit. So shout out to Pine Box for that one. Home, I think, not outfit.
Yeah.
So it's my favorite because it does a really important thing for what gadgets need, and that's if you aren't playing a heavy gadget deck, and even if you are, being able to cycle a card out is really, really important. Sometimes you'll have a few cards, and this is true for any deck, you'll have a few cards you want to see more late game, but not early, and vice versa. And so having a home that can give you that, as soon as you get one gadget out, you can start making sure that you get more gadgets, or you can cycle those gadgets out that you don't need for maybe dudes because you lost someone in an important shootout, or maybe you don't have a slight modification, or you don't have any sort of cheat and resolution in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And even for late game, what I will sometimes do is I'll fish for... I've had a few times where I'll really fish hard for control points on deeds.
Right. Because if no one else has played Doomtown before, you win the game by having more control points. Let's see if I can find a deed with... Yeah. More control points, which is that blue poker chip on the Circle M Ranch there. Then your opponent has influence. And influence is the red poker chip on the dudes. And having a card like Smith and Robards Trade Show where you cycle cards, and one of the big differences between Doomtown and, say, a game like Magic the Gathering is that in Doomtown you have the luxury of getting cards that you discard back, because when your main deck runs out of cards, you reshuffle and put everything back the way it was. So having a dead card in your hand in Doomtown is not as bad as having a dead card in your hand in Magic the Gathering, because eventually you're going to get the card back later.
Yeah, and in Doomtown, there's a couple of other really good things about that. Sometimes, so in Magic, you have a sideboard, and so you can have very specific meta cards in the sideboard that you can deal with. In Doomtown, you don't have one of those. So if you look at Sherman Mortgage in my deck, that's partially there for slide. So it tries to keep...
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. You have to pretty much toolbox your deck in a way to deal with whatever you might end up against in a game.
Yep. And interestingly, the one above it, the quarantine tent, is also kind of a meta card. It's not really good. This is one of the ones that I actually cycle a lot early on. It's 2 control points for 3 Ghost Rock, but it has 0 production.
Yeah.
So it's really bad when you're starting out. This deck is pretty unusual in that it has 6 wealth.
Yeah.
Most decks I see tend to fall around 3. For Mad Science, you really need that first burst of money.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to invent at least 1 gadget really early, and those can range from 1 to 3 in this deck. And there's Force Field, which is 1, but it's actually probably closer to 2 or 3.
Right.
Because of how many times you'll use it. Like, if you're inventing it the first day, you may end up needing at least 2 extra Ghost Rock to make sure you survive.
Yeah, because this actually you have to spend the Ghost Rock to affect your hand rank.
Yep. It's like, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off again, but of course in Doomtown, like, not only do you start with your home, but you also start with some guys in play, which is your starting posse, your starting group. And let's go over those dudes first.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to jump to, because the 6 wealth. So this is a weird deck, and a lot of people do not like the second thing that comes in there. So there's 6 wealth, but there's only 1 income.
Yeah.
And also 4 influence, which I'll get to in a bit. So it's only 1 income. However, if you look at my starting posse, I actually have ways to make more money each turn.
So I'm down here at Postatron.
Yep, Postatron is probably the obvious choice here. So Postatron is a very double-edged sword in this deck and in most other gadget decks, I think. He is a 3 Ghost Rock and 1 upkeep, but he's a 2 stud. He's the only gadget you can start with by default.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that he has that noon boot ability that lets you park him in town square and gain 3 Ghost Rock. And that's just every turn you boot him and he's good there. That is a great ability. We can get it working. However, he is the only stud by default in this starting posse. And that has a pretty big implication as to when you want to use his ability.
Right.
Against aggro decks, a lot of times you don't want to just start off by moving him out and booting him. You'll want to build up some stuff, and that'll take an economy hit, but it's usually better than just leaving all your mad scientists and poor Luke and Irving to just kind of suffer back at home in case they have a first turn kidnapping.
Yeah, now Irving's another way that you can actually make some income.
Yep.
He's in my entrepreneurs, my Morgan Regulators horse deck, because whenever he joins the posse for Maggie Harris's job to go looking for a horse, I can get an extra Ghost Rock out of him whenever he actually joins that posse.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a big use for him. My deck doesn't have that particular interaction, which is a little rough because that does mean he gets into fights where he can die a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
However, he often gets the force field. He'll sometimes even get the double 6 gun, just to make him a stud.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want him in, if you can, you want him in as many fights as you can get him in. Because he just keeps making you money.
Yeah, every single time. It's like, because this is not a once a game day, or in Doomtown the turns are known as days. It's one of my favorite parts of the flavor. Is like every turn is one day in Gomorrah or Tombstone or coming up Deadwood. So you're not limited to how many times you can actually get a Ghost Rock from Irving.
Yeah, that's correct. You can get him any number of times he's in a posse, and Sometimes importantly, I don't have it in this deck, but the Personal Ornithopter is a card that works really well with Irving because he can come into, as long as you start with the Ghost Rock, you can actually get him into fights for free because you pay 1 for the Ornithopter to fly him in, and then you get his, yeah.
So, yeah.
There's actually a really cool trick with that I don't know if new players will know. If you look at Old Marge's Manor or Lula's Exploit, they get Ghost Rock that does not go into your stash, but stays on that card, and it's used for gadgets.
Mm-hmm.
Or in Old Marge's Manor's case, also for action cards. What's interesting about those is that you can use that trick with the Personal Ornithopter to actually put money into your stash. So if you fly in with the Personal Ornithopter and pay for it from Lula's Exploit, you lose 1 from Lula's, but then you can get 1 into your actual stash for Irving. And I've used that trick a few times to actually basically afford a card that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
That's cool.
Yeah, sometimes it's really interesting to be able to like throw Irving into a fight just to make that extra Ghost Rock, so you can play that next deed or that next dude who's unbooted and now can move around the town, or the deed that's now incontestable if they boot all their dudes to fight you.
Okay. Now let's see, who else we got here in the deck? William Specs.
Yeah, so keeping on the train of discounts, he is excellent for. So he has 2 great uses in this deck, and let me find. So one is he can vent your flamethrower, which is probably not the best card to put in the deck, but it's still a solid card that we can talk about if we want to later. But he's the only one who can invent that in your starting posse for guaranteed success. The other thing he does is he can make your gadgets free, or in the case of Double Six Gun, just 1. He also makes a lot of your out of town and ranches cheap, which I have 1.
Let's see, you got Circle M.
I got Blake Ranch.
And Blake Ranch.
Lula's Exploit is out of town. So is Pat's Perch. And Gamora Gaming Commission. Yep, that's the only other one. But often that's enough to really justify it. Because getting to play Blake's Ranch for 2, or Circle M Ranch for 1, those are 2 really good cards to bring out, and effectively making money on your first turn with Blake's Ranch is pretty powerful. There is an interesting problem here, though.
Yeah.
So this is something that usually when I build Mad Science decks, this is a pretty weird one for me in that there's only 2 Mad Scientists in it. I got burned a lot by early turn aggression, or early game aggression when I started playing, so I try to pack as many scientists as I can into a starting posse. With only 2 Mad Scientists, Diego being the other one, whose trait is actually not useful in this deck, interestingly enough, you have to invent Positron on the first turn. So I always use Diego for that, but if I do that, then I can't invent with Specs and get the discount. This is something that trips up a lot of people early on. Specs doesn't actually get to make the pull for the gadget inventing if you use his ability. It's still completely worth it, but it does mean that on the first turn, I often have to invent a gadget for full price, or if I don't have one in my hand, I use him for some other for his discount.
Now, your other Mad Scientist is Diego Linares.
Yep. So he's usually used in a lot of horse decks, especially with Jagen's.
Mechanical skeleton, I think.
Thank you. I couldn't remember the name. I just call it Jagen's, and there's a lot of pronunciations out there. So,
I've always understood it as Jagen's.
Yeah, I am not claiming to be right on that one, but his trait actually doesn't really matter in this deck because the only horse
is the mechanical horse.
And it's a 5. So everything that starts in your deck is going to succeed at that pull, unless you somehow get Irving, Specs, or Luke into your discard. Then you have to start paying attention to it, I guess.
Right.
But he's a cheap mad scientist with influence, and so that's really a great thing. Also, if you lose him early, he goes back in your deck if he is discarded, and he's on value.
So, if you need to lose somebody, he's probably going to be the first choice.
That depends really heavily.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that the 4 influence is a thing. This deck, that's low for a lot of decks sometimes now because they're concerned about starting at slide.
Yeah.
So with only 4 influence, a lot of times I have to lose Luke, who's my last
starter. Yeah.
Starter here, which is rough because Luke is an amazing starting dude.
Yeah, I'm just looking at him. He's a 1 Ghost Rock, 2 draw, 0 influence, and his his noon shootout ability is where he hits the heaviest. Is noon shootout. Move a gadget from your dude in this or an adjacent location to another one of your dudes in this or an adjacent location, and that allows you to move things like Force Field and Devil's 6 Gun and Hydro Puncher from one dude to another, even in the middle of a shootout.
Yep, and he actually doesn't have to be in the shootout for that to work.
Right.
For part of it, yeah. Because you can use his ability to bring gadgets into a shootout even if he's not in there. If he is in the shootout, you can move a gadget out to save it if you need to.
Right.
But Luke parked in town square can basically hit any in-town deed from any in-town location, which is amazing. But unfortunately, being the bullet catcher, he's often the first to go if I need it.
So with that starting posse out of the way, now here's the big question. How does your deck win?
Okay, so my deck wins. So this is a little bit of a fun, maybe bittersweet story. But I had been playing a straight flesh gadget deck for a long time. And there are some cards that annoy people in those decks for somewhat justifiable reasons. And after playing with it for a while and people complain about those cards, I went ahead and stripped out most of them. The only ones that people don't like playing against still are Force Field and a slight modification, but I took out Jagen's, I took out Decimator Array, because Decimator Array in particular can do some very broken things because of the way it's worded and because all the just general things it can do.
Right.
So in this deck, and there was another reason too, it was a straight flesh deck that required a lot of setup. So I'd spend a lot of games in the first 2 or 3 turns just camped at home building gadgets, which was fun, but after a while it can be a little monotonous. So if you notice the shootout structure for this deck, it is actually a 16-16-16 deck with only 1-7 being one of my values in the starring gang.
I've actually got the list on my screen sorted by value, and you can tell it's a 16-16-16. This is extreme. This is the tightest it can probably get.
Yeah, the only way it could really go better is if I dropped one of my starring dudes, which is a very probably a bad decision. So what I ended up doing was I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put in a really aggressive shootout deck that will surprise people, and it did. There were a lot of times when people would fight me early, and instead of just A lot of the reason why I start three mad scientists most of my decks is that oftentimes it's not worth fighting a first turn kidnapping or curse of failure or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes what I do is I just let those go, and people expected that sort of thing. In this one, I just fight every time, pretty much.
Right.
Because it turns out even with one draw bullet, you can often make a really good hand. Sometimes legal, sometimes not, but
I think that happened
even
to
with
me.
a couple of studs. Yeah.
I was like, I think we were playing a game. I think it was a casual game, and you had like 2 draw, and I had like a 3 stud 1 draw or 2 stud 1 draw, and you literally 5 carded into, I think it was a 5 of a kind.
Yeah. And in the finals, I believe the very last shootout, I want to say I had no stud and 2 draw, and I went into, I think it was like a legal, or it was like a cheating full house or something, and I decided to see if I could make it better or at least legal, and I lucked into a legal 4 of a kind or a legal full house and just destroyed him. But that's what you can do when you have a deck that basically that does not have off-value cards.
And you've got some pretty good choices here for shootout actions and stuff. Pin down's always good. Grim Servant of Death, and I want to bring up this one specifically. The way this is worded, you can actually switch around your own dudes.
Yeah, so this is a card that I didn't understand when it first came out. I understood it, but not really.
Yeah.
So I'll explain how I think it works the best most of the time. So it is a 1-cost card, which is important. It's one of those things you have to really pay attention to when you're playing, because a lot of action cards are 0, so it can trip you up. So it's choose a dude who is not in the shootout, who is at home, and who is controlled by the mark or the player opposing a job. So that has to be the defender, basically. That dude's controller may have them join their posse, moving if necessary. If that dude does not join, one of your dudes becomes a stud, gets +2 bullets, and your opponent takes 2 extra casualties if their draw hand is ever cheated this round. So to break that down, and I'm going to be really careful about this and a little pedantic, because it's one of the things that I think is hard to really grasp about this card. When you are playing this, you are choosing the dude, but you're not choosing which player. The game state tells you that.
Yeah.
So
this is like this is kidnapping and curse of failure protection. This is insurance.
Sort of. It's actually even it's somewhat better than that. What it can do is, let's say that I'm parked on one of your deeds, and I have 2 influence there, and you only have 1.
Right.
What I'll do, if I have this card in my hand, is I'll just stay there. I won't call you out. I'll just wait for you. Because what will often happen is that if I can get that initiative to be there first,
right,
oftentimes my opponents will end up calling me out. And that's important because now I choose basically, do I bring my dude in or not? And I can look at the game state to see what the best option for that is. Because I'm playing a gadget deck, usually Specs is at home kind of inventing something or having invented something. And I don't want to bring him in.
Right.
But what it does is, like that earlier thing I was talking about where, I'll bring in Irving for a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if Irving's out there by his lonesome, and you're looking at him with your like one stud or even like a 2-draw or whatever it is you have,
Yeah.
you might call him out thinking that he is going to run away. Or if he doesn't, I mean, he's a 0-draw. It's the top 5 cards of my deck. I mean, even in a deck like this one, it's a good shot that I'll be cheating or maybe even just get a 2-pair. But then I play Grim Servant of Death, and suddenly I don't have normal Irving. I have stud Irving with 2 bullets. And if you're ever cheating, you take casualties.
Yeah.
This round. The stud and the 2 bullets are for the whole shootout. But that is a huge swing.
I remember in that one game, I think it was the same game, that you played this, and it pretty much caught me very, very off guard.
Yeah, it's amazing because people don't usually run this, and there's good reasons why people don't. I love this card for a lot of what it does, but there's huge downsides to it. I've sat in games where I haven't been able to use it because I've had to call out,
Right.
and they've had no one at home. And so, because that first sentence is the requirements of the ability, if they don't have someone who's at home and you called them out, you can't even use it just to see if you can pull them in. There is one upside to it. Oh, so go ahead.
I was about to say, it's like, so if you're not meeting the requirements of this is a good card to cycle away with Smith and Robards Trade Show.
Exactly. And I think some of my losses are because I didn't recognize that, or at least partially attributed to that, because this would be in my hand thinking I could use it, and I had to go aggressive. They didn't have someone at home, so I ended up stuck with a card that didn't do anything. You can use it offensively, so if you do call out a dude and you feel pretty confident about it, you can go ahead and pay the Ghost Rock, target one of their dudes at home, maybe an opposing Irving or Stevie Linden or whoever it is that's going to be a key part of their game plan or just is a lot of influence.
A good example from my deck would be Maggie Harris.
Yeah, if you can get her early, she's great because then you just shut down a lot of the free or cheap horses.
Yeah.
So Grim Servant of Death in that situation is really good to combine with Pin Down.
And Pin Down is a simple, choose a dude. They have to be selected as the first casualty. If they're the shooter, they get -3 bullets. So it eliminates the possibility that your opponent's best shooter is actually going to be chosen as the shooter, and also makes them the first casualty of the shootout should your opponent lose that shootout.
That is definitely one way to play it. In this deck, there's another good way to deal with it.
And I'm hopping over straight to Force Field.
Yep, that's where I was going to go. Yeah, Force Field is the other reason to run Pin Down, and the reason you might not want to put it on their shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, let's say I hit you with Grim Servant of Death, and I picked Irving or Maggie, and then I hit them with Pin Down instead of your big shooter. Suddenly, at the very worst, if I have a Force Field, we'll tie, and you'll lose somebody important in your game plan, and I'll lose whoever I want. And this deck specializes in playing dudes like the Gray Man for 2, or even Byron Decker for 3, or John Longstride for 4. Once you start building up Ghost Rock, you can start throwing down a couple of dudes that are on value, and yeah, you might lose them in a tie, but they go right back in your deck, and suddenly your deck is stronger again.
So you're not actually acing anything out of your draw structure.
Exactly. You can usually get away with that pretty well.
Well, up here is like, since we're on the 8s, I'm gonna shoot up here to a slight modification, which is probably the strongest card in the deck.
It is definitely one of the stronger cards. It's one of the more unique cards, I think, rather than I would say the strongest sometimes. In this deck especially, there's force fields. So the cost to slight modification is a very, very weird cost.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if people who don't play Mad Science realize that. Depending on your deck, and depending on what gadgets you have available to you at the time, a slight modifications cost is either very negligible, in the case of Yagans or Force Field, where you don't really care if they're booted or not, or it can be really, really bad. So Devil Six Gun is a big one.
Yeah.
Because if that's your only cheat and resolution, and you have to choose between, let's say, Sun Your Eyes on one of your studs, or Pistol Whip on the dude with Force Field versus having Double Six Gun available for the cheat and res, that's a pretty tough choice.
Well, while we're on the topic of the Devil Six Gun, but you were about to say mechanical horse. It's like booting the mechanical horse. Not so much because the first ability, the pay 2 Ghost Rock, repeat noon.
But that second ability can be really important too.
Yeah.
And that's really variable. Depending on what the entire situation. Mechanical Horse is one of the more interesting chess pieces in this because it has 2 different chess abilities, right?
Yeah.
You can pay a bunch of Ghost Rock to move as much as you ever want to in a game, or you can for free boot it and keep someone from booting into a posse, which can be another big important thing. Or you can let the dude get booted so that you can keep the Mechanical Horse unbooted for a slight modification, or for Smith and Robards trade show, which is the other thing that boots your gadgets.
So there's the risk versus the reward part of the deck, is that you have lots of things that require you to boot a gadget, but perhaps you might need that gadget later in that turn. So
exactly.
But as I was about to bring up the cheating punishment, because you were on the topic of the Devil Six Gun, and so we'll just segue into your cheating resolutions. Starting with the Devil Six Gun, it's a 6 difficulty mystical weapon gadget for 3. It's a +1 bullet bonus and turns your dude into a stud. And this is probably a really nice cheating resolution ability. I mean, it is in my opinion, because you actually get to search your deck, your boot hill, which is where your ace cards go, or your discard pile for a joker, and put the joker into your hand, which jokers are wild cards that can be any suit and any value that you need at the time, and which can shoot a hand massively in your favor.
Yeah, and you didn't even get to the best part. The last sentence is really important in this.
Yeah, you don't ace the joker anymore. You put it back into your deck.
Yeah, so suddenly, so I'm going to talk about a couple of really good uses of this. One is when you're in a shootout, especially if you happen to have Ricochet in your hand, it's really great to be able to choose between, do I use Devil Six Gun to get that Joker back, oftentimes from your boot hill if you need to. Not only does it raise my hand rank now, it also tells my opponent there's now another Joker in this deck for the next round. So you're going to have to deal with that again soon. Do you really want to fight this next round against me?
And I've been paying attention, and most deck builds in the current meta have some form of Joker recursion.
Yeah, there's basically 3 ways to get Jokers back. from your boot hill. There's Devil's Six Gun, which is gadgets only, really.
Yeah.
There is the Joker's Smile, which is an ace value deed, which basically is 1 cost, 0 production, but it lets you do things to Jokers, like get them from boot hill or discard them from your hand. Both great things.
Yeah.
The last one is a very early card. I want to say it was in the original, or was in the base set, and it's Watley Estate.
I've always heard that pronounced Whately, but then again,
Oh yeah, I have heard it that way too. Yeah.
But I've been a Lovecraftian fan
ever
since my teenage years.
I grew up as a reader, so I often mispronounce a lot of things. But the Whately Estate.
Yes.
It gets anything that's not a dude, I think, out of your discard or boot hill.
Or boot hill. So.
Which is great. Yeah, not discard. Boot hill to discard. It is, however, really expensive. It's a great card.
4 Ghost Rock.
And I think
it's 4 Ghost Rock and 2 control points, but it doesn't have production.
Correct.
Yeah.
It does have built-in protection from your opponents because it has a trait.
Yeah, they have to boot in order to move there. And it's also king value, so pretty much any sort of spellcasting decks that runs kings is looking for this. Or even running at a single copy off value.
Yeah, I actually did that for a long time. Basically, all my gadget decks early on ran a single off value Whately Estate because it was the only way to get Jokers back. Sight Beyond Sight was big in our meta locally, and so I often had slight modification or some other gadget get aced, and so I'd have to start pulling them back out.
Right.
But the really powerful thing that the Devil's Six Gun does is, again, it lets you use that Joker immediately, and it puts it back in your deck and not your discard pile. Both the other cards put them into your discard.
So its use is immediate, and whereas the other two are slower, but still useful.
Yeah. The other neat thing about Devil's Six Gun is that it's great for lowball, because you can often get that boot hill lowball or that boot hill Joker into your lowball hand suddenly when lowball, maybe even make it so that you're not cheating anymore in case that's a concern, and then you shuffle the Joker back in.
It doesn't.
What's real?
Yeah, it doesn't specify that you have to use it against your opponent. You can actually use it on yourself.
Yeah. Now you have to. Your opponent has to be the one cheating.
Okay.
Like all cheating resolutions. Every cheating resolution targets someone else, not you.
Right, but...
Yep, but you can use but you use it for yourself.
So if you... the case in point being is if both you and your opponent are cheating, you can use Devil's Six Gun to probably ensure that you're going to win and get the Joker back in your deck.
I think the most infuriating thing I've done to other people is I have had a Joker in boot hill and a Joker show up in my lowball hand. They've cheated. You replace the first Joker with the one from boot hill, so you lose neither of them. The one that was in your hand gets discarded instead of getting aced, and then the new one gets put in your deck.
That's mean. That's evil.
It's huge for saving your Jokers when you can do that sort of thing.
The other big cheat and punishment card that I see in here is Ricochet, which I think I went over that one with Jordan.
Yeah, he had it.
And this is I can't even begin to describe how powerful I think this card is. It's like they discard their shooter, and if your hand is legal, you don't take casualties, and you draw a card, so Ricochet replaces itself.
Yep, and this is another great reason to maybe not pin down their shooter if you think they'll cheat.
Yep.
Because then they'll lose their shooter anyway, and they still have to take that first casualty. And you don't have to take any. And that's great when you force field up to tie.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really should say about force field.
Let's go back to it.
Because the way that hand rank manipulation works in when you raise your hand rank during a shootout, you go to the lowest possible hand rank of that
It's the worst.
tier.
So if you were to raise your hand rank to a full house via hand rank manipulation, it's the worst possible full house.
Yep. Which does mean that when it's time to run or gun, or chamber another round, you have to. You are the one who will always be choosing first.
Like whoever has the lowest hand rank, who quote unquote loses the shootout.
Yeah, exactly, and that can be a big thing when you're deciding should I stay or go, because you will be the one to make that choice first.
Right.
There are 2 other cards in here about cheat and punishment.
I'm looking at Gamora Gaming Commission.
Yep, that one's excellent for low ball. And that's pretty much all it does most of the time.
You get, D gains, controller cheat and resolution boot. This D gains a permanent +1 production, which that's not the controller centric part of it. Draw a card unless the cheating player pays you 1 Ghost Rock. So.
Yep. It's great for. I have had it used against me a few times, but it's still great for low ball when you're. When suddenly you're getting an extra Ghost Rock, maybe 2, or drawing an extra card. I think I have used this in a shootout maybe once. And that was basically when the shootout was already well going my way. There was nothing else I could really do with a shootout punishment, or I didn't have one. Cheat and punishment, sorry. But, then I get a rock or a card.
And you mentioned that there was another cheating resolution.
There is. Well, there's cheat and punishment. So this is the one that I find to be a weird. So going back to Grim Servant of Death, I know we talked about it, but that line about 2 extra casualties if their draw hand is over cheating this round is really big.
That's an ace. I mean, they have to ace a dude because of that.
And that's not taking up your cheat and punishment slot.
So you can actually do this and play a ricochet.
Yeah. Yeah, that 2 extra casualties is automatic. And often that does mean that you have to be prepared for them not to cheat. Which is something that earlier on when I was playing, I was really bad at doing. On table cheat and punishment, or punishment that they know is coming, like Grim Servant of Death or Devil 6 Gun, really disincentivize your opponent to cheat. So oftentimes they'll really go out of their way to be legal.
Yeah.
Which means you have to be prepared for. You often don't get to use your really fancy ricochet if you have your Devil 6 Gun unbooted.
Right. But looking over the rest of the deck, I see some pretty, I wouldn't say common, but some pretty.
There's some pretty standard cards. Circle and Ranch. Circle and Ranch is on 8, and pretty much.
Yeah.
You run Circle and Ranch on 8 if you're on 8 most of the time because it's great value. 3 for 2 production, and you draw a card. Also, one of the few cards that you can actually boot without meeting the requirements because that if in the front.
Oh,
I don't know if that's.
You know what? I didn't know that. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you could actually just boot that to boot it for the sake of booting it.
Yep. You don't get to draw the card, but you can boot it, and then the if statement happens, which can be important if your opponent has 2 cards in hand and has a dude with 1 influence, and you're booted out, or you can't. You have 4 cards in hand and you can't get rid of any of them for whatever reason.
Let's see. Epidemic Laboratory.
Yep.
This is a good way to get control points for a deck like this. I'm actually.
This one. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was like to say this is like one of my main choices because I'm working on a First People's idea right now, and this is like one of the main choices that's going into the deck.
Yeah, so it's a great in this deck. It's a good card for basically if you're in the middle of the game and you're kind of controlling town square because you have Positron out there, you have like Nathan Shane, you have some dudes spread out. You played out some of your deck. Your opponent is forced to turtle.
Correct.
You have like 3 or 4 gadgets out. So you start running Gamora Gaming Commission with Diego or Specs instead of inventing, because then you start getting more money and more control points. A really important thing with that, though, and it's the same important bit with Smith and Robards or with any other time you're playing control points, make sure that you are prepared to fight if you go over to check for them. I have done that accidentally a few times and not actually been prepared for a fight. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I have actually held off on using Smith and Robards or playing a deed because I counted out my opponent's influence and realized, if I'm not really ready for this fight this turn because I'm going to lose. I don't have any cheating resolutions in hand, or I don't have a slight modification, or whatever it is.
But
you were mentioning.
It's like, well, yeah, we got some. It's like, and we got some. It's like these on value dudes are just some. I think these are good picks. It's like Nathan Shane allows you to snap a action card out of your opponent's hand, or more, depending on his bullet rating. Roderick Byer is a 5 Ghost Rock, 1 Influence Mad Scientist. You mentioned the purpose of the Gray Man and Byron Decker.
So I'm going to call out a few of these.
Yeah.
Because so Nathan Shane, and I'm going to give some really broad views here. So Nathan Shane with 2 Hydro Punchers is a 5 stud.
Yeah.
Not only is that a silly amount of stud to have, but suddenly you are looking at every card in almost everyone's hand. Shout out to Anarchists for their silly amounts of ways to get extra cards. But I mean, 5 cards. The big thing is he wants a mechanical horse so that he can go into every fight unbooted if he can. There's nothing worse than realizing that you had to boot him in, and now you can't use his ability. But being able to scout your opponent's hand, see if they have any cheating resolutions, discarding one, or see like, oh hey, they don't have anything in their hand, I'm just going to cheat like crazy, or they have 1 cheating resolution, I'll discard it, or they have 2, I'll discard the worst one, and hopefully I won't have to cheat. Is just amazing.
Who else?
Roderick Byer was actually a huge swing several games. If I lost someone early, like Diego or Specs, him being a mad scientist in the deck, because there's only 3 mad scientists in this deck that aren't in the starting gang. Him being able to come out, he has 0 upkeep, and just still have an influence, kept me alive in certain games. The Gray Man was... I threw in the Gray Man kind of as a weird... I think he has been in some of my other decks too. I'd have to check. But he's been a surprisingly powerful dude. Because again, you throw a Hydro Puncher on him, or you throw 2.
Yeah, and then you're pretty much able to send almost anybody home booted.
Yeah, if you get 2 Hydro Punchers on him, which I think I've only been able to do when I was basically already winning. But for 2 Ghost Rock, he is an upkeep, so that's something really you have to pay attention to early on.
Yeah.
But he's easy to discard if you don't need him anymore after that turn, or if you need to have a sacrificial body to go back in the deck. He's great for that. But if you can keep him out and you can throw 2 Hydro Punchers on him, he is a 7 stud. He is a 7 stud who throws someone back home who's 7 or lower, and that's enough dudes in the game.
Right. Yeah.
And more importantly, that's usually a lot of studs, especially starting studs, are that value or lower. Same with a lot of the kind of early game. I don't remember what value Willa May is, but 6. Yeah, she can be sent back. She's usually dead by then, but even with 3 bullets, that sends a lot of dudes home in starting posses. And sometimes you just need that in the beginning. Dead Billy Jones, I actually don't use a lot. He's just kind of there for value, and occasionally he gets to come out because he's expensive.
Yeah.
And not a stud, which can be a big deal.
I have him in my Morgan Regulators deck simply because I've got so many ways to actually turn him into a stud.
Yeah. He's definitely not a bad dude to have in your deck. No. He just happens to have not been very useful in this one in particular. John Longside, I know, is a favor of yours, and he is, quite frankly, sometimes very amazing to have.
Especially whenever you slap your mechanical horse on him and just...
Yeah, the fact that you can unboot it and use the react again, or use it for a slight modification, or Smith and Robards. I'm pretty sure I actually did that once, was I used his ability to unboot the horse, and then use Smith and Robards trade show to get a control point, and a card cycle.
Neat little combo there. Good old Lane Healy.
Oh, Lane Healy is the dude I want to love so much more than I do.
I kind of have issues with him too.
He is him and Elander Boldman are probably two of the more egregious examples of almost but not quite for dudes in the game. So Lane Healy, the +2 bullets while he has a horse, you'd think is great. He is 3 influence, so if you need 3 influence for a turn, I mean, play him.
Yeah.
But without anything to attach, he's a 1 stud, 3 influence, and 2 upkeep for 6 Ghost Rock. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a hard sell. That's...
Kramer is excellent in basically any gadget deck.
Yeah, just a straight... This is a trait bonus. This is a blanket bonus. So as long as you're controlling gadgets, he has bullets.
And by default, you control 1 because of Positron.
So he hits the board as a 1 stud, and then only gets bigger from there.
And you can put weapons on him to actually increase his... the bonus is capped at 4, but you could throw 2 Hydro Punches on him, and then he's an 8, or even just like a double 6 gun, he's a 5.
Yeah.
You do have to pay a little attention to how many gadgets you have out, because if you lose one, you have to start thinking about his bonus again.
Let's see here, Adelaide Rose. I don't see Adelaide Rose used a lot.
So she's actually really good as an on-value in the deck mad scientist. I don't think... So having played her a bit, I've never actually felt the urge to put her in a starting gang. Because A, she's on value, and there aren't nearly enough affordable on-value mad scientists that you want to really put one of those into your starting gang. You really want to put in like Irving, Specs, or Jen because she's a 5 and she's a stud, or who's the other one I'm thinking of? I haven't played in a while. Kyle Wagner. Those are all good because they're low value, so you don't want them in your deck. Adelaide's stat line is actually pretty good. I mean, she's a 4 cost, 1 upkeep. She's a mad scientist 1, so she helps you go a little bit lower in value. She's a 1 bullet stud, and she's 1 influence, and she has an ability that is pretty good. It's definitely not amazing. But again, the thing I ran into with this deck and with some of the other ones I've had is that without having a lot of gadgets out, you don't want to boot yet another gadget for an ability.
I think a really good gadget that you could put on her is like if you wanted to like build around her, might be the what is it called, the etheric shockwave inducer.
Yeah, that's an excellent one for it.
So
It doesn't care if it's booted.
Yeah.
Yep. Doesn't care if it's booted. She's probably not going to be your main shooter sometimes. So the +4 bullets versus not having 4 bullets is usually not a huge deal, but it does swing you effectively -1 bullet for them and +1 bullet for you.
Mm-hmm.
Byron Decker is an excellent one. I don't know if there's a whole lot more to talk about with Adelaide.
Yeah.
Definitely slot her in if you're running 9s. I don't feel like that's very... I don't think there's any time where I'd really have to choose someone over her in a Mad Science deck that's running 9s on value.
Right. And Byron has some protection. It's like, okay, while he has a gadget weapon, he gets +1 influence. So a Devil 6 gun or a flamethrower. Is the force field a weapon?
No, force field is not a weapon.
Gadget. But a Hydro Puncher, anything along those lines.
Yeah, so Hydro Puncher is probably the worst one for him because you need 2 to make him a stud, and he kind of begs to be a stud if you can get him there.
So he's a good candidate for the Devil 6 gun.
He's an excellent one for it. As you said, he has some protection. So not only, if you throw a Devil 6 gun on him, not only is he now a 3 stud with 2 influence, and he's only 3 cost, 1 upkeep, so that's a recurring theme of this deck I noticed was that there's a lot of upkeep. And so you kind of need to constantly find ways to get your income boosted if you can.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just another example of another dude with 1 more upkeep that you have to deal with. And you're starting with 2 already. Positron was really helpful for that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned his protection, and that react is really, really interesting. Because it keeps you from getting killed by things like point blank or by, let's see, point blank. I think shotgun just discards. Could be wrong there.
No,
it's been a while.
Shotgun aces.
Oh, shotgun aces.
Aces.
Yeah, so shotgun and legendary holster.
Yeah. Coach Whip.
Coach Whip, actually, he's not protected.
Yep, Coach Whip doesn't protect him because Coach Whip is a cheating resolution. Yeah.
Yep. So anything that's not a cheating resolution, the ace is your dude in a shootout. He basically throws another dude in front of him, and that dude gets injured but not killed. So he's great for later in the game when suddenly you might want Diego back in your deck, or one of your other on-value dudes. And so, you have Byron out there, and suddenly you have 2 more influence, and so maybe you can let Diego go. Or just like the Gray Man, or anyone else out there, really.
Yeah.
That you just don't need. But he can really protect you from a lot of neat things. And that includes casually. So if you lose by 2, suddenly you're effectively losing by 1.
Moving on to a Lander Bowman experienced.
So this is another one of those dudes that I said I wish was just a little bit better. He's significantly better than the unexperienced version. But he's expensive. He's a 6 cost. 1 upkeep. But for that, you get 0 draw bullets, Mad Scientist 3, which looks really good on paper, but typically, if you're inventing, you're either accepting a certain amount of risk for missing inventing polls, or you're like me and are really paranoid.
And you just you build to succeed. It's like there's
build to succeed.
No way to fail.
His shootout ability does boot him, which I found to be a bit of a thing. but you get to unboot a gadget, which is pretty rare.
Yeah.
You get to use its abilities another time, which can be amazing for things like Double Six Gun or Hydro Puncher,
Or even
Mechanical Horse, as we talked about.
Or
what was that?
The fun thing is that I'm not sure if we actually talked about it, is that Force Field doesn't boot.
Correct.
So you can actually boot Force Field for your Smith and Robards trade show and still be able to use it in a shootout.
Yep.
But I can understand, it's like using a Lander Bowman to unboot one of your gadgets to use it with Smith and Robards trade show and get a control point.
Yeah. The other thing that lets you do. Now, I don't have any experimental gadgets in this deck, so you don't get to unboot them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you use it with a weapon, it gives an extra bullet and that dude becomes a stud, which can be huge for things like Sun Your Eyes or Hydro Puncher.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he's a lot of Ghost Rock. And so oftentimes if I'm playing Illander, I'm either very desperate because I've lost everyone and I basically have one dude in my hand who can give me, like, let's say I have a really bad shootout and I lose Irving or I lose Specs, or maybe I lose like both of them. Playing Illander is kind of the last-ditch attempt to be like, all right, here's 2 influence, here's a mad scientist, let's see if I can get my game plan back on. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
And the last guy we got going on here is Jarrett Blake. He's one of my favorite dudes.
He's actually probably really weak in this deck, because unlike your deck, which runs a lot of horses, mine really only runs 2.
Yeah, the Mechanical Horse. But he's on value. He's 5 cost, 1 upkeep, 2 stud, 1 influence.
Yeah, and his stat line is good enough to run.
Yeah.
If you need an extra stud,
mm-hmm.
especially later in the game when you're really just trying to control a town and you need an extra stud to kind of like late in the game when the chess game is a big thing,
right?
And you suddenly need a floating stud who can kind of help out. Like you have Irving over on one deed and maybe Roderick Byer on another one, or Dead Billy on a third, and so now like you don't have any stud in any of those, but you need someone kind of in town square waiting in the wings to jump in and fight. He's great for that. Now in a deck like yours, he's amazing because you have horses everywhere.
I have horses everywhere. Whether it be Pedro or a Pinto or a Mustang or anything, I can, just use him to swap out. I think I had a game one time where I actually swapped out Irving and swapped in Jarrett.
Yeah, so he's actually a really good example of a dude who is very situationally amazing, but still not bad.
Yeah.
If you need him for value. John Longstride is actually another good example of that. Like, he's not amazing in this deck, but he's cheap. He's an influence. He's still 2 draw bullets.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, his ability rarely gets used in this deck. But even for just a 4 cost, no upkeep, 1 influence draw, like, that's good.
Well, I believe that about wraps up the deck. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah. Thank you. It was fun.
Well, anyway, we're probably going to ride off into the sunset on this one, and
okay.
I don't have my next guest lined up yet, but congratulations on the Ranger Badge win.
Thank you very much.
And also, thank you for being the help that you've been to a new player like myself. I've been into the game for, oh gosh, 20 years, over 20 years, like back when the original Doomtown was a thing. Yeah, I've been a Doomtown fan ever since I was like 16 or 17. But I've not really been a player until recently, and you've been a very good proponent in showing me around the game and learning how to play. But
thank you. It's definitely one of those games that is very hard to pick up sometimes, and having someone around to show you the ropes, even when I'd been playing for a while, having people who are more experienced than I was pointing out flaws or weird problems in my decks was really helpful.
Well, I appreciate it. At any rate, we're gonna cut things off here, and until next time, everybody, we'll see you at the table.